All right, enough with the bad dentist jokes. I know I was going to get myself in trouble with that. All right, thanks everybody for being here. Again, Bill Newman with Group Dentistry Now. This is the DSO Study Club webinar series. We are going to try and stay true to the 1 hour time frame. Got a lot of information to pack in here today. So brief introductions of both Brian and Janet, and then we'll get into the meat of the webinar, which is Selling Dentistry, How to Drive Case Acceptance. And we will have a recording of this later in case you want to watch it again or you want to share it with colleagues that may have not been able to watch this. And again, thank you, RevenueWell, for putting this on. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Looks good. Getting a couple more jokes coming in. So maybe we'll have time to talk about those at the end. So first off, brief introduction. Brian Paladie, he is the Director of Enterprise Sales at RevenueWell. He leads the group practice and DSO's sales team at RevenueWell. He takes a collaborative and consultative approach to developing teams and relationships with customers. Again, thanks, Brian, for being here. Janet Hagerman. Janet and I were just talking about this before we went live. We've known each other pre-Group Dentistry Now, before the platform existed. She is a practice management expert and former corporate dental hygiene director for a 150 plus location DSO. She is an international speaker, consultant, and author. And I got Janet's book when I first met her. She was kind enough to give me this, Selling Dentistry Ethically, Elegantly, and Effectively. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. She helps DSO dental teams grow their communication and leadership skills, increase productivity, profit, and patient care. And so with this, I am going to let Brian take over for a little bit. And yeah, I think you can take it away, Brian.
Great. Thanks so much, Bill. Just a little background on RevenueWell. Our mission at RevenueWell is to enable providers to create closer, more connected relationships with their patients and their communities. And we're a practice growth partner that helps group practices and DSOs by enabling effective patient communication across locations. So we provide visibility into individual practices as well as an enterprise portal to drive results across the organization. And RevenueWell also drives case acceptance while patients are in the office through our unique integration with CareCredit's Batch Quick Screen, as well as after they leave through our automated treatment plan follow-up and campaigns that you can launch automatically. So we're talking about case acceptance here, and Bill warned everybody that there'd be a poll coming up, so we hope you're ready. What we'd like to see from you is, here we go, what the average case acceptance across dental practices is for existing patients. So we've got three options here: 30 to 40%, 50 to 60%, or 70 to 80%. So Bill, you ready to launch that poll?
Yep, I am going to launch it right now. So you should see it pop up on your screen. And when we see, all right, we've already got activity here. Love it.
Great. And that's for existing patients, patients of record, not new patients.
Now I know the answer here, so I can't vote. It says that
no,
most of the panelists cannot vote.
No, this is so I can see it in real time. So this is interesting. We have about half, we're over half of the participants voted. So we want to get this a little bit higher before we actually compare what you think it is compared to what dental economics says it is.
Based on surveys that they
based on another survey.
Yeah.
So give it a couple more and we'll, looks like we've got decisive winner here. All right, so I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share this with everybody. So, all right, we got one more in there. All right, that's it. Share the results. All right, let me know when you see that, and then I'm going to let Brian take over from here. Can everybody see those results?
Yes.
All right, so what we see here is 43% say 30 to 40% case acceptance is the average case acceptance. And close second is 39% at 50 to 60%. And boy, wouldn't everybody like 70 to 80%, but only 18% thought that was the case. So so the thought is that it is almost a tie, but I'm going to stop sharing this so we can actually see the screen, but 30 to 40% eked out 50 to 60%. So I'm going to stop sharing that. And I think here's the answer. Or did we miss it? We actually went past one, right?
I think we're good here. So Janet, so it seems like the numbers skewed a little bit lower than this 80%. So can we talk a little about the goal of 80% for existing patients?
Yeah, for sure. So, for your patients of record that presumably you've already created relationships and good rapport with, you would think it should be around 80%. And indeed, that is the goal. But what we know from those surveys is that actually the average case acceptance for patients of record is around 50%. So literally half your patients that get diagnosed with treatment and presented walk out without getting treatment. So think of the revenue that you're leaving on the table. And in addition to that, and perhaps more importantly, the disease in your patients' mouths that's walking around because we didn't get them, the case acceptance wasn't there. Now, the 30 and 40%, that's for new patients. For new patients, studies show that the case acceptance is even lower. So anyway, the good news is we have a lot of opportunity for growth, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely. So we're going to talk about that, and I think that Bill already showed the book that you've literally written on the topic, Selling Dentistry Ethically, Elegantly, and Effectively. Can you talk to us a little about what prompted you to write this book and a little bit about your thesis on it?
Right. And this is a great segue into the whole concept of selling dentistry. I dedicated my book to all the dentists that asked me, when you come in to work with my team, could you talk to them about selling dentistry? Because I know dentistry is walking out the door. And for that matter, I need help too. But whatever you do, don't use the S word. Don't call it selling. So, we're going to talk about that in a few minutes about the stigma of the word selling. But when I wrote the book, I wanted to make sure people understood three critical aspects of my version of selling dentistry. And the first is ethically. And, we had some questions about that. Thank you to all of you who sent questions in ahead of time about, particularly for a DSO, the perception of ethical selling dentistry. So to be clear, when I'm talking about selling dentistry, I'm talking about dentistry that is clinically diagnosed, all right? We've taken the radiographs, we have the information, we've diagnosed and we've documented. So this is not about selling something to somebody that they don't need. Selling dentistry ethically means it has been clinically diagnosed and documented. That's number one. I'm going to skip to the last one, effectively. And effectively basically means that the patient says yes. They said yes to the dentistry. They scheduled it. They actually arrived for their appointment, they got the treatment done, and they paid for it. So that's being effective in selling dentistry. And there's a difference between selling dentistry and just educating our patients. And we'll talk about that in more detail as well. And finally, elegantly, because all the concepts in selling dentistry can be taught or utilized by any personality style. This is not just for people who are, particularly outgoing or think of themselves as a salesy kind of person. This does not have to be pushy. It can be very elegantly handled. So whatever personality style you are, you'll be able to learn from today's program, today's webinar, the book, and the course, The Concept of Selling Dentistry Ethically, Elegantly, and Effectively.
So to get there, Janet, what a really great overview for the path to get there, and doing it in such an elegant way. As we start to think about putting that into practice, what are the things that we need to keep in mind?
Well, the very foremost thing that needs to happen is the mindset of everybody in the practice. And for that matter, in a DSO coming down from corporate, whatever the mission and vision is, to embrace a concept of selling dentistry as a good thing. I mean, when you think about it, the dentistry, the technology that we have available now is just amazing. Not just the clinical technology, but also the communication technology. RevenueWell is a perfect example of that, Care Credit. So we should be so proud of the type of life-changing dentistry that we have to offer our patients. So shifting that mindset, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail, but that's crucial. And then making sure that as everybody in the practice and throughout practices at the various locations within a brand, that they all are consistent in their mindset. They're consistent in their phraseology. They're consistent in the types of words, the powerful words that we use, the phrases that we use. And we'll talk in detail about some of those communication strategies, but it's important that it is consistent in all the offices. And then what are those systems, and how do we implement those through meetings and getting the message across so everybody speaks the same language?
Absolutely. So let's get into a little bit of the detail there. You mentioned shifting the mindset, kind of thinking about it a little bit differently, thinking about technologies, what we can offer to patients. Let's start with, what is the mindset now and what needs to be shifted?
Removing the stigma from selling dentistry. You know, when you think about it, we all sell all the time. We don't call it that, but we all are in a position to want to persuade somebody to our way of thinking. Think about if you're a parent, when you try to convince your kids to do their homework so they can go to Disney World on vacation, or a young woman who's trying to convince her boss that social media is a viable marketing tool, or the housewife, you know, a wife trying to convince her husband to paint a certain color in the living room. That's a personal example. So we're always persuading, trying to get people to look at our point of view, selling our ideas. The question becomes, how good are you at it? So removing the stigma of selling it being some sort of sleazy or pushy, it doesn't have to be that way. So just acknowledging that every one of us has a little bit of salesperson in us. So how do we get focused in those communication efforts? How do we get clear and focused in our own individual mind, and then also as a team? So the great news is everybody in the practice can become good at sales regardless of their personality style. They can still be themselves and sell dentistry.
Yeah.
And then, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you mentioned something there in terms of kind of being yourself, and then not feeling like you're that sleazy salesperson because you're selling, but it's kind of about like connecting, right?
Absolutely connecting. It's about building relationships, for sure. That's all it's about, is building relationships. And you know that at RevenueWell, because that's part of what you do, is maintain the relationships even when we're not face to face with our patients anymore. The other thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of shifting our mindset is, in dentistry, everybody in dentistry knows about patient education, and we have been taught, brainwashed, if you will, that patient education is the answer to everything. That if you educate your patient enough, that they'll come around, see the light, and accept treatment. We know that's not true. The surveys tell us that 50% case acceptance is not success. So what is the difference? I like to talk about the difference between selling from the head and selling from the heart. You know, we have that left and right brain, part of our brain that's split. One side is very logical, and the right side is very creative. It has to do with communication. Now, in dentistry, we live in the left side of our brain. We live in the world of millimeters and science and technology. So when we're educating our patients, we often just keep trying to tell them more information about the logistics, the logical, technical, clinical part of the treatment that they need, when what they really need is to be understood, to feel like you're their patient advocate. And that's where the selling dentistry comes in. If you want to ask If you want to sell, we ask, don't tell. So before we educate, we need to pull back and start to think about how do we get into relationship quickly with our patients? How do we sell from the heart?
I really love that, the heart, not the head. I think that information overload and analysis paralysis can often come into play when there's so much information that needs to be processed, but kind of thinking about it in terms of, well, what's in it for me? You know, what is it that I need to do? And I think when we buy, I think as people, we love to buy, but we hate to be sold to.
I love that phrase.
If you think about the last thing that you bought that was exciting, or something that you needed to buy, you kind of wanted to. And I think part of this is, if you think about, even if you're buying a home stereo system, and what you really want is that immersive sound experience when you're watching a movie. You don't necessarily want the 5.1 surround sound system with bass boost or whatever. Those are facts and that's information, but what we really want is that experience. So when you think about the emotional response, especially when you're thinking about dentistry, what is it that you really want to get out of this? What's in it for you? What can be exciting, and if not exciting, but internalized as necessary. You want to be able to get there, like you said, from the heart, and feel like you've made a decision that's a good one, not one that is because you just read all the facts and need to make a decision.
Right. And then, once we connect with our patients on a relationship basis, we'll know the time for that patient education. They'll ask us, but until they're ready to hear that, we need to meet them on their level, not expect them to meet us on our clinical level, but meet them on their, I call it their heart level.
Absolutely. So you mentioned making it more relationship driven, getting to that heart level. It sounds great. What is the actual process? How do you make that happen?
Yeah, well, the most important thing is, as I said, if you want to sell, ask, don't tell. Any really good relationship-driven salesperson will tell you that. Asking questions and then learning how to listen with intent. So when I talk about asking questions, it's important that we learn to ask open-ended questions right from the start. So when the patient comes in, if they're coming in for an implant, the first thing I would want to know is, what do you know about implants? Or if I'm the hygienist and the patient needs periodontal therapy, but they came in for their free cleaning, I would want to know, so tell me what you know about periodontal disease. We have a tendency to jump right in and start explaining these procedures to patients when, truthfully, if we were to find out what they need and what is going on in their brain first, we get a whole world of information about their perspective that we can then address. So two of my favorite questions, my values questions, are, so what is the most important thing to you about your oral health, or about your teeth, or dentistry? And find out where they're coming from. Some people are very cosmetically oriented. I had a patient once that said, I'm in a hurry because I'm going on vacation. Will you just clean my front teeth? So clearly that was a cosmetic patient. And then you have people that don't really care what their teeth look like, but they want them to last and be functional. So if I have two patients that I'm presenting treatment to, one is cosmetic and one is functional, I'm going to present that treatment entirely different to those two patients, even though it may be for the same treatment, for the same tooth, for the same reason, in the exact same quadrant, but their values are different. So before I talk to them about what that treatment is, whatever it is, whatever that, if it's a crown or whatever, I'm going to address their values first and talk to them about that. So that's a good open-ended question. What's the most important thing to you about your teeth? What is the most important thing to you about your dentist or dental office? Is it time related? Is it pain related? I just don't want to be hurt. Some people are so fearful of that experience that they've had. Is it financial? I only want what my insurance is going to pay for. Once again, I'm going to address those different types of values differently when I first begin to present treatment before I go into the actual clinical description of it. So open-ended questions are huge, and they'll just give you a world of information, and it also gives you permission to then speak more clinically to patients when they ask you, when they tell you what's going on, what they think about periodontal disease, what they think about a crown, what they think about an implant, what they think about veneers.
You know, that's really interesting, because the way that you feel when you're asked an open-ended question versus a closed-ended question is completely different. So you gave the example of, how much do you know about crowns? That invites an opportunity to respond, well, I know a little bit, but what can you tell me? Or, actually, I had one before and I know what it's like. It kind of gives you some opening there to talk. But if you just say something in a closed-ended way of, do you know what a crown is? Then you might feel dumb if you say no. So you might say, yeah, I know. You kind of get that reaction. I think naturally we get closed off when we are asked a closed-ended question. It's almost like an invitation to have a conversation about it by asking something open-ended. And it's just a little tweak to that same kind of question.
You're absolutely right. It is a little tweak, but it has huge ramifications. Absolutely. A great open-ended question that we often stumble out of, when we explain something to somebody and say, do you understand? Or do you have any questions for me? Typically, people will shut down just the way you described. But when you change that ever so slightly to say, what questions do you have for me? It's huge. The answers that you'll then get, the questions that you'll get.
Absolutely. It almost presupposes like everybody's got questions at this point. What are yours? As opposed to, did you not understand what I said? Because that's what we hear, right? We hear it differently.
Exactly. You're exactly right, Brian. Exactly. So as you ask open-ended questions and get more patient response and get a lot of different personal information about patients that'll help you relate to them, increase your relationship, increase your trust, customize your presentations and your conversations to their needs, you become their patient advocate. And patients feel that. Patients, there's that saying, people don't care what you know until they know how you care. And that's one of the ways that we can let people know that we care in a environment where we have to create relationships very quickly. We don't have the luxury of, a lot of time. So we have to become very focused in our communication and not be casual in our conversation, but focused in our communication. So asking these open-ended questions and then listening with intent to understand rather than reply immediately. Those are great ways to connect with our patients heart to heart and let them know that we're their advocate in the practice.
Absolutely. And there's a stat on here that we've got about 64% of smartphone users seek healthcare recommendations. So if it was just information that they were looking for, there's a place they can get the information. But what you said about tailoring it, customizing it to their particular needs and their values is where you could really shift or make that shift, help them better understand how to translate that information and why it should be important to them.
Absolutely. I want patients to leave your practices, DSO, company, and go, you know what? I just feel like I found my dental family. I feel like I'm part of their family. That's what I want them to feel when they leave that practice.
All right. So we're talking about shifting the mindset. Now, what you said, you want to feel like that family. Yes, so I think there's a great segue here, because how do you create this throughout the whole patient experience? And what is the patient experience?
Right. The practice environment needs to be one of positivity. And that needs to be a mission, a goal in the practice. That needs to be like a core value of the practice and the brand is positivity. Because when patients walk in our practice, they come in, we're taught as healthcare professionals to leave our emotional baggage at the door, and we try very hard to do that. So we put our professional happy face on for our patients, but nobody tells our patients that. So our patients come, with all their problems and their baggage and their traffic and their financial challenges. So it's really important that we give them an atmosphere of positivity and that the whole practice is dedicated to that. some of the things that you can do to make things more comfortable for your patients, matching and mirroring the demeanor of patients. People like to be around people that are like them. You go to a party and you sometimes you meet new people, you either resonate with people or you don't. And typically the people that you resonate with are people that are similar to you. So one of the ways that you can relate to people very quickly is be more similar to them. So to give you an example of that, my personality type is fairly assertive. I'm not known as a quiet, shy, retiring person, although I have my quiet moments, but I do have a tendency to be on the more assertive side. So if I'm working with a patient or even on the phone with somebody who is either very quiet or perhaps speaks very, very slowly, like we have a tendency to do in the southern states, if I want to be in rapport with that patient, I'm going to slow my demeanor down to match theirs. It's just going to make it more comfortable for them to receive whatever information I'm trying to share. And conversely, if you are a very quiet, shy person and somebody like me walks into your treatment room and is in your chair, you need to up things up a little bit, just up your energy up a little bit so I don't get bored. So these are some very simple things that anybody can do. You don't have to, take the DISC test or Briggs-Myers or, there's a lot of different personality tests or assessments that you can take that go into more detail on this. But this is just a very simple way to help your patients feel more comfortable in your presence, like we have something in common. It's an intangible thing, but it's powerful. So matching and mirroring, handoffs. And we had one of the questions was about handoffs. Handoffs are huge. How does your patient feel being moved from one treatment room to the next and being handed off from one healthcare professional to the next, from one team member to the next? So I want you to make sure that those handoffs are seamless and comfortable. That patient should be introduced to the next team member by name, even if you know each other. So if it's a new patient, it would sound like, Brian, I want to introduce you to Dr. Newman. If you are a patient of record, it would be, Brian, you remember Dr. Newman, or let's say Bill is the assistant. Brian, you remember Dr. Newman's assistant, Bill. So each person knows each other's name. Something personal, like, Brian's here. He broke that tooth and he's getting ready to marry his daughter off this weekend. So we want to see how quickly we can get that fixed. So something personal that has to do with the reason that they're there. What the next step is, you're going to get an x-ray. Or Dr. Newman's going to take a look at this. So just so as the patient, I know what the next process is going to be. And so those steps should happen every time there's a handoff. And the whole team should be coached in this, so they have that script down pat. So the last thing that you want is for a patient be wondering, what's the next procedure? Or if you have to leave a patient in a room unattended for a period of time, to be able to let them know what you're waiting for, who's coming next, how long a period of time they can expect to wait, and then make sure they're not there longer than that. So handoffs are really, really important. And, it's one of the many things that we do in dentistry. It kind of reminds me of, the hidden pathways underneath Disney World, where all the work really gets done. But at the top, when you're a guest there, everything seems so seamless and it just runs so smoothly and wonderfully and positively. And that's sort of how we want our patients to feel. They never know about the meetings that we have, the conversations that we have, how hard we work to make their experience comfortable and pleasant. But that's what we want them to feel like. And then finally, I can't speak highly enough about praising each other in front of a patient. We all like to be with families or couples or groups that are winners. And we need to let our patients know that you're in a group of winners. You found the right place. XYZ Dental Company, Dr. Smith's practice, you are in the right place. Dr. Smith's amazing. Our treatment coordinator is fantastic. She's an expert at maximizing insurance benefits for you to make your dentistry affordable. Dr. Newman is wonderful. Our patients love him. He is so gentle, and you're going to love him too. Suzanne, our hygienist, I'm getting ready to take you over to her treatment room right now. You are going to love her. So you pre-frame your patients for loving you and loving your practice and praising your patient. I know it's been a long time since you've been to the dentist, but guess what? The good news is you're here now, and I want to compliment you for making that big step. You're here now, you're at the right place, and we're going to take good care of you. So praising the patient, and particularly praising the practice, the different members in the practice. So that patient feels like, oh my gosh, I feel so good. They are such a great team. They love each other. And I'm so glad I'm here. I found the right place. So you want to pre-frame your patients for being happy to have found you.
You know, Janet, that makes for a great patient experience, but I can't help but think what a great workplace environment that creates as well. You've got praise happening throughout the day and really kind of building up your teammates. I think that creates just a great environment. And I think it's that kind of energy that can become palpable for patients to know that this is, you know, a place where people care and respect each other and respect patients. I think that public praise goes a long way for patients, but also folks that work in the office.
You're absolutely right. I'm glad that you remember to talk about that. You know, how great it is for the team. I actually have a process that I teach when I coach called "You Got Caught: Growing Your Greatness." So it's an opportunity for the team members to compliment and congratulate each other when they hear or observe their team members doing something special. It doesn't have to be something huge or big. It could be something small. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the matching and mirroring part of it is one of those skills that when we talked about shifting the mindset, you don't have to shift your personality. You don't have to become a different person. There aren't some people that are born for sales and some that are not. It's really being able to think about it as like, oh, you know I tend to be a more subdued kind of person. And when someone with high energy comes in, maybe I just need to amp up my energy a little bit to try to match and mirror this person. Or if I'm a really outgoing person and I'm sensing somebody's kind of not responding to that, or they're a little bit more subdued, I can bring it down a notch too. You're not changing who you are. You're just kind of turning the dial up and down a little bit.
Absolutely not. It's just more a matter of being aware. And I think, you know, for people listening today, it's going to be more a matter of, oh my gosh, I just never thought about that. It's as simple as that. So these strategies are simple strategies that can have huge, you know, benefits. And on the handoffs, by the way, I forgot to mention, if you want, I have a cheat sheet of the 5 components of great handoffs. So anybody that wants that, just email me. The contact information will be at the end, and I'll send them that. Just put handoffs in the subject line, and be happy to send that little cheat sheet.
Awesome. All right, so the third part here then is implementing processes to enable selling. So we've shifted the mindset. We talked about what it is we need to do for the patient experience. How do we actually do this at scale, especially when we're thinking about the scale of a DSO?
Yeah, well, I think it's important from the corporate all the way down is to identify your core values. What are the core values that you believe in as a company that you can create? And I have a culture clarification process that I go through with my clients to help them identify what their core values are, so that you can then turn that into a simple mission statement, vision. That is something. What I find is a lot of times people maybe have their core values, but they're not written, so they're not documented, and they're not being able to use them for to really support the brand of the company. So those core values should be something that when you're recruiting for people, you want them to know what your core values are. These are the kind of people we're recruiting for. People that believe in continuing education, for example, that believe in selling dentistry is the best way to serve your patients. So in recruiting, and then in interviewing, and then in training throughout the whole process of a brand of a DSO. And then how do you make sure everybody understands that? And that's through regular meetings. I've written a manual on how to have meetings and how to have good productive meetings that make money. And then one of the best things that a DSO can do is teach their doctors in particular how to do comprehensive evaluation. So one of the challenges with case acceptance is new patients come in, they have a lot of treatment that needs to be done. And it's this worrisome thing of, well, if I diagnose all of this treatment, and then the dreaded comment of, well, how come my last dentist didn't find all this treatment? So it's a matter of overwhelming the patient. So how do we present a comprehensive treatment plan in a way that does not overwhelm the patient? So, and that is prioritizing. So the treatment triad is 3 components. It is, and people typically triple their treatment acceptance by using it. So the conversation is a little like this. I'm looking at 3 types of treatment in your mouth, Mrs. Jones. One is urgent, immediate. I call it 911. That's just anything that we know we have to do immediately. And I didn't really need to tell you that. That's why you came in. You broke a tooth. So obviously we need to fix that right away for you to get you out of pain. But also I'm going to be looking at things that could be preventive. In other words, you have a lot of old metal fillings in your mouth. Looks like they've been there a long time. At some point in time, we'll need to replace them so they don't become 911, so they don't become an emergency. But we'll look at that and see if we can do some of that over time, and you can help us prioritize that by your budget. And then finally, we're going to look at cosmetic things that are totally not necessary, but fun to look at, because there's a lot of cool things we can do in dentistry now cosmetically that you might be interested in. So that way, when a patient gets a comprehensive treatment plan, they understand that it can be prioritized. It doesn't all have to be done at once. Studies show that in today's world, patients want to be, or at least they want to feel like they are a part of their treatment plan. So this gives the patients an opportunity to feel like they are participating in that treatment plan. The other beautiful thing about the treatment triad and having a comprehensive prioritized treatment plan is that, you know, some will, some won't, some wait. So if your patients are coming back, but their treatment plan is not completed, this gives everybody else in the office, all the other team members, an opportunity to contribute to the treatment plan by following up with it. So if I'm the hygienist and I'm seeing the patient for a continuing care visit, then I can see the treatment plan and see the next items on there and begin to speak to them about that. What questions do you have to me about that crown that Dr. Newman diagnosed last time you were here? Where are we with that? So, so implementing these different systems by being very clear on your core values and having that incorporated through all the many different systems of your brand, having regular meetings to reinforce that, and then utilizing the treatment triad, a prioritized method for doing complete treatment assessment at the beginning of a patient experience.
Absolutely. And I think everything that the practice will have done at this point will have created that environment to be able to have a healthy, productive conversation around that treatment, because they'll have felt like they've been welcomed, they felt like they've been handed off appropriately, they'll have felt that they've made a connection. And so when you come to some of those more uncomfortable conversations around care that is needed and something that maybe they didn't know they would need to be thinking about today, you've opened up and created that environment for them to feel more comfortable having a more vulnerable conversation with you about it.
Absolutely. That's beautifully put, having those vulnerable conversations. So you have prepared the patient. I think it was Abraham Lincoln, or at least he is credited with having said, give me 5 hours to chop down a tree and I'll spend 4 hours sharpening my axe. So selling dentistry is, the whole team needs to be involved. And so just as you said, once you're ready to have that conversation, all these other steps need to be in place first. I know one of my clients was saying, after we took your course, it's like when my patients came to me for treatment, for me to present treatment, it has been so much easier now because they're prepared. So it is a process and it involves the whole team.
Absolutely. And on the cosmetic side, I remember in one of our chats, Janet, you talked about what can happen if your patient doesn't know that you've got cosmetic procedures you could be doing. Can you share that story?
Well, yeah, it was a story. In an office I temped in for quite a long time. Great dentist, great team. But I had a patient that came in, she'd had veneers done and I couldn't find it in any chart notes about it. When I asked her about it, she said, oh yeah, I had it done in Florida. And on further open-ended questions, found out she had it done in Florida because her sister had her smile designed by her dentist. And when I asked her why she went to, I said, well, why didn't you have Dr. So-and-so do it? She said, oh, I didn't know he did veneers. So we need to let our patients know what those cosmetic options are for sure, as well as the other, other options.
Absolutely. And not shy away from it, because you've created that environment. It's conversation, it's good for the patients to know that these are procedures that your practice can do too.
Right.
And if they're ready for it, then you can make that decision.
We always want to give them all options, whether it's clinical, financial, whatever.
Absolutely. So kind of as a recap here then, we've talked about these best practices, shifting the mindset, establishing consistent experience and communication strategy, and implementing those processes to help sell with confidence. And I think that's a really key thing there, the confidence, and then also coupled with the care, because that will come across. And I think when we reflect on, shifting the mindset of, feeling uncomfortable with the concept of selling because you don't care, selling because you don't have confidence, that's why I think sometimes it gets that bad reputation. But when you've got a consultative relationship and you're selling with that confidence and the care for those outcomes, that should be, something that your patient should agree with too, that, hey, this staff cares, this person actually cares about my well-being.
Yeah, so that mindset needs to shift from selling, the sleazy selling, to selling as serving, and the concept of being confident, believing in what you're selling. And, certainly I'm assuming we all certainly believe in the dentistry that we provide and what a life-changing service it can be, serving our patients and giving them all the options and letting them make the choice. We had many questions about, changing your approach because of somebody's financial situation. We don't know what our patients' financial situations are. So this is sort of a segue into, what processes do you implement to help people sell? And fortunately, we have some great new technologies now to help us with that. But it's giving patients options and letting them and helping them to make the best decision, giving them enough information to make a well-informed decision, and then helping them guide them to what we know to be the healthiest options. So before I ask you to elaborate on that, Brian, I just want to share with our listening audience one of my core beliefs, and that is, in this country, most people in this country have the money for what they want, whether they need it or not. I mean, think of the patients that stand in line for the latest cell phone, not because they need a new one, but because it has a fancier camera with more pixels or whatever. So most people in this country have the money for what they want, whether they need it or not. Our job in dentistry is to help them want what they need. And what I'm excited about are the technologies that are in place now that help reinforce the patient relationship. I think this is so cool because we can only do so much in the office, and I've talked about that so far. But once the patient is not in the office, there are other ways that we can maintain those relationships. And that to me is what's very exciting that RevenueWell does in CareCredit.
Yeah, absolutely. And a great segue there. The relationship that you've created in that patient experience when they're in your office, at some point, they're gonna walk out. They're gonna back to their car, they're gonna go home. You mentioned that traffic that they came with, they got to get back into traffic, and they've just had this great experience. And this is where RevenueWell really helps partner with dentists and DSOs, because we want to be able to extend that patient experience when you're no longer able to have them there with you in the office. And a few ways that we do that is through custom campaigns where you can build on those in-person conversations, specifically around treatment plan follow-up, where a lot of these campaigns that we have can actually be automated. So you can set it so that once the patient leaves, within one day, they're going to get information that you shared with them to reinforce that treatment plan. So more information around it, some video content to be able to reinforce, because we also know that a lot of these decisions, they're not made in isolation. If you sit down with somebody and you say that, hey, you need a great deal of dental work done, it's going to, have, a cost impact. It's going to have, you're going to have to, come in for a procedure. They're going to talk to their spouse about that. They're going to talk to their family, and, they're going to be seeking information. So the way that practices can continue that conversation, provide that supplemental information is really important and critical, especially with timing. In a way that RevenueWell helps, you mentioned the technology here, is we've got deep integration with ADA codes, so that when you have all of the treatment plans in your practice management system, we read that information. Those ADA codes read over, so we're able to be very specific in the follow-up and help practices be able to deploy these kinds of communications without having to do a lot of work to get there. So it reads it so you know immediately, what information to send for what treatment that has been proposed. And then really being able to track all of that, right? So knowing that it's working. So how do we know that we sent messages to our patients, and how we know that they booked, and how do we know that they came in? That's super important as well, to be able to know how to track that. So there's a couple examples here of what our interface looks like. I mentioned those ADA codes. Here, we talked about crowns, and here's all, got to scroll here to get all the codes associated with crowns. But what patients will receive is an email that is really going to be specific to the practice they have a relationship with. So some DSOs have the same brand name for all the practices. A lot of DSOs retain the brand of the practice itself. So we want to make sure that when the patient receives that message, that they're continuing to get that information from the practice they've got the relationship with. And we want to make sure that the information contained within it is also really helpful too. So one piece of this is being able to remind them that they've got a treatment plan, but the other is to have information. And so because those ADA codes pull over, we can also have all the either articles on the web or video content to help tell that story as well. Because again, you're not making this decision in isolation. Somebody might want to know, what exactly is a crown? What does that look like? Hey, let me show you a video on this. But what we also know at RevenueWell is that there's two key things that really prevent patients from booking the next appointment once there's been a treatment plan laid out for them. One is fear of the procedure, and the other is fear of the cost. And fortunately, being able to allay some of those concerns while they're in the office and then carrying that forward is a great way to establish that relationship. And one of the things that we know, as we've talked about, Janet, is having the right information, having it tailored to you, and having it explained to you in a way that makes you feel included is key. So information is part of it. So that's kind of the fear of the treatment. Having that great relationship in the office and having the supplemental information to be able to follow up on is critical. But then we start talking about the cost. And what is this really going to cost me? We've got an integration with CareCredit that enables practices to be able to, with just a very limited amount of information, find out what those patients are pre-approved for, so you can have that in-office conversation about what the cost is going to be, and how it can be broken out into payments to make it affordable. So even if we've got money for the things that we want and think about needing, it's okay, but I still got a budget for this. I still got to make sure that this is going to be right. So there's an opportunity to really have that conversation there in the office. And then this is an optional thing, as you can see here, we do enable practices to be able to send information to include that cost. You can turn it off if you want. Some practices prefer not to have that out there. They'd rather have a phone call come in and have a conversation around it. But we give a lot of options there to customize this to make sure that it fits the ethos and the values of the practice, as well as how they want to communicate with their patients. So I mentioned the care credit integration. So really being able to know, hey, this patient, in this demo case here has a credit limit of $2,000. What would payments look like? Our quick screen integration with care credit enables us to be able to really quickly have that information without having to impact credit score or have to do a lot of invasive information from our patients to be able to get that information. Just it simplifies the process, and DSOs love this. DSOs love the ability to be able to have this pre-screening done out the gate.
This is before the patient gets in there sometime, right?
That's right.
They can actually find out if they're pre-approved before the patient comes in.
Exactly.
So they already have that information. And I love that customized email where it coordinates with the ADA code. So if I need a crown, it says to me, Janet, when you were here, we diagnosed the crown, blah, blah, blah. And here's a video to describe what it is. That's amazing technology.
It is. And the fact that we can automate it in the background,
yes,
so that you can set it. So once that treatment is, appears as, needing to be scheduled in the practice management system, we'll read that. If it's not scheduled yet, then our system knows to deploy a series of emails, and you can customize how many emails you want to send. You can send up to 5. You can customize what information is contained in there, whether it's the video and the web articles around it, cost, the content of that message. You can customize that, but you can have it run automatically so that when the patient comes in, within 1 day, they're going to be getting that email, email, even text, and even direct mail as well. So you could select whether you want to do email and text message. So many more folks are preferring texting these days. So getting a message from your practice, is probably a way to reach folks. And we all know with marketing, it takes multiple touches, so you don't get everybody on the first time. All right, so we're coming close to time here. One last thing before we move over to questions is we want to be able to track this information and track how effective these campaigns are. So here's an example of different campaigns that have run that have been email, a mix of email and text, and really being able to see how many locations this was sent to and what the revenue was associated with it. A really great way to be able to isolate what's working and scale that across your DSO to make sure that you've got all your practices using the best templates, the best communications. And this can be centrally managed too. So some DSOs prefer to have locations send out the communications themselves. Others prefer to have everything centralized. So we make it easy and flexible based on how you prefer to work to be able to send out these kinds of campaigns.
It's a beautiful thing.
All right, so we're coming up about 5 minutes left, and we do have some questions we want to make sure that we get to as well. But I think there was a couple of things, Bill, that you wanted to touch on first.
Yeah, I sure did. And thanks again, Janet and Brian. Janet, just a couple of things that stood out there. And I know we're really on a time crunch here. There was so much good information. But I love you talking about the open-ended questions, pre-framing the patients, and the public praise for not just the patients, but also the staff. I never had a dentist or hygienist that ever asked me, how I felt about my smile or what was important to me regarding my smile. So maybe I should switch dentists, but that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, really, really great information. Janet, do you want to talk a little bit about this limited invitation for DSO managers that you have here for the first 10 applicants?
Yes, quickly, yes. This is for a private strategy session with me where we'll identify your practices that have the most potential to double their case acceptance by December 15th. So we'll look at your, whatever your region is. Do you manage 10 practices or 25 or 30 practices? We'll look at those practices and go figure out, who are the practices that most have the most potential to double their case acceptance by December 15th. And then just enter your name and your email in the chat box or send me an email to janet@janethagerman.com. So the first 10 applicants, I'm offering this for the attendees for today, the RevenueWell attendees.
Great, thanks.
Looking forward to
thanks,
hearing
Janet.
from you. Yeah.
And we'll have all this information in the show notes. I've had a couple questions I was answering there. There was a question regarding, will there be a recording? Yes, there'll be a recording. RevenueWell, the question was, is this just for DSOs or can it be used for private practice? I'm going to go out on a limb and say it can be used for private practice as well.
Absolutely.
All right, sounds good. Real quickly here, got a bunch of questions. I know Janet and Brian both answered quite a few of the ones that came in earlier. This is a great one, though. This was at the top of our list, was how do you avoid having a bad reputation if we're going to be talking about selling dentistry? So you don't want that perception or a bad reputation for either overdiagnosing or for overselling dentistry. So I think we should definitely take that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was glad to see that because that's always a concern. So first and foremost, get clear on your core values, as we talked about. Make sure everybody on the team is congruent, and then making sure that we are diagnosing according to what is clinically indicated. So whether you have a clinical board, how big is your DSO? Some larger DSOs have a clinical board. Some just starting off, the clinical board may be the one doctor that started, but some doctor, or if you're talking about hygiene, a clinical hygiene director needs to have, these are our clinical parameters for how we diagnose a crown, or how we diagnose the need for an implant, or how we look at decay on the x-rays. So there are clinical parameters, and that those are the clinical parameters that are followed, and they're basically based on ADA parameters. So clinically diagnosed treatment that you could support in a treatment plan, that another doctor and another company could look at the x-rays and go, yep, that's what was needed. And then the other thing is that all of you are using the same language, the same language that speaks heart to heart. So those would be the main things that I would say from my end.
Okay.
Read my book.
That's great. That's great. So probably have time for one last question here. And again, there were a lot of them. So Janet and Brian both have access to the questions, and they can follow up by email, although a lot of them were already answered with the presentation. What's the current trend in regards to utilizing treatment plan coordinators? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, great success. So if you have a dedicated treatment plan coordinator, clearly they should have very good communication skills with the patient, ability to ask good open-ended questions, and have an understanding of, follow up with, the answers that would be with RevenueWell, Care Credit, all the financial options that the patient has. But they're in a position to give the patient 100% of their attention in a private environment where the rest of the staff is still busy, continuing on with the day and other patients. So if you can absolutely utilize treatment coordinators. And I'm happy to answer additional questions on that. Send me emails. I'm always open to any kind of value added information I can give you.
Great. Janet, shout out your email address real quick.
Janet, Janet, at janethagerman.com. So it's JanetHagerman.
And Brian, how about yours?
Yeah, so it's B Paladie, so first initial last name, BPALADIE at RevenueWell.com.
Excellent. Thank you both for being here today on the Group Dentistry Now DSO Study Club webinar series. Thanks to RevenueWell, and thank you, Janet Hagerman, for your thoughts. The email addresses will be in the show notes. So if you're going to watch the recording, you'll have access to that as well, and have both Janet's all the contact information, including her phone number, and Brian's contact info as well. So that's it. We appreciate it, jam-packed like we promised, and we told you we would try and get things really just down to an hour, and we were pretty close, maybe about a minute over, but we did really well. So that's it for now. I'm Bill Newman. We appreciate everybody's time today. Thanks for listening, watching, and again, thanks to the panelists for this great content.
Thank you, Bill and RevenueWell.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.